I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blumke.
And you're listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Be Secular. Be free to love, be able to choose, be accepted no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, or belief system. Be Secular.
Be Secular merchandise allows you to display your support for equality and the separation of church and state, while also donating up to 50% of the profit from your purchase to nonprofits, groups, and artists that support those same values.
Go to www.besecular.com, pick your item, and then choose who you want to get a donation from your sale.
Listeners of this podcast will get a 10% discount if they use the promo code FRIENDLY. Make a statement. Be you. Be secular. Steve Wells is the author of the amazing Skeptics Annotated Bible, the website and the print book, which documents all the contradictions and horrible things the Bible says. It is honestly one of the most useful websites for atheists I have ever seen, and you could check it out at skepticsannotatedbible.com. The print version of the book, like I said, is a must-have. Wells is also the author of Drunk with Blood, which documents all of God's killings in the Bible. And his newest book is called Strange Flesh, and it's about how the Bible is used by both sides of the culture wars to justify anti-gay bigotry or, depending on who you talk to, support LGBT rights. So, Steve, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
So your work, I mean, anyone who's seen the Skeptics Annotated Bible, it is so meticulous, it's so comprehensive. I mean, you've really gone through the entire Bible and chronicled where, you know, all the misogyny is and where all the instances of cruelty are. How does that process even happen? I mean, are you reading through the Bible so many times? Are you reading through it once and just keeping... I feel like there should be like a lineup on the wall somewhere that you might see in a movie, like someone has pictures of everyone and highlighting
like
things.
A beautiful mind.
Yeah, exactly. And like highlighters going everywhere. How do you go through that process of documenting all this?
That's pretty much how it started. You know, I was reading the Bible for the first time, and the reason that I was doing it is that my sister was in the process of becoming a Jehovah's Witness. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to talk her out of this, I need to know the Bible better. And so I just started reading the Bible and highlighting stuff, you know, as I went along. And before I got through Exodus, I was thinking to myself, well, why hasn't anyone else done this from highlighted and presented the Bible from a skeptic's point of view? And so I decided that I would go ahead and do that.
In high school, a friend of mine gave me a Bible because she wanted me to read the Bible and become a Christian. But what I ended up using it for is exactly, Steve, what you're talking about, where I started that was the first copy I actually had, a real nice copy. And I was using the little, what do you call them, the blue sticky notes, Post-it notes. And I was like, here's a contradiction with this one. And they had weird little footnote references. Oh, and then I discovered Skeptics Annotated Bible. I'm like, oh, someone's already done this.
I don't have to do this myself.
I don't have to do this myself. It was great. How long did that process take then for you?
Or is it ongoing, or is it a completed project?
Well, I started it in 1989, and I've been working on it really ever since. So, you know, it's been 25 years. But what it took me the first, you know, after I started, I worked my way through the Bible. It took me, you know, a year or two to kind of get through it, and at first I kind of flew through it and just highlighted all of the things that really strike you, you know, as anyone. Just the horrendous, crazy, absurd, you know, nasty stuff in the Bible that would be pretty much any highlighted verse would be pretty much a belief killer, you know. At least it would seem like it should be. It should be to anyone that read it. And so I wasn't too concerned about being thorough, because certainly I had hundreds of passages that were pretty obvious, and all I had to do was just really highlight those. But then, of course, when you get into the contradictions and whatnot and the prophecies, you know, it starts to get more difficult. It gets more difficult, of course, as anything does, the more complete a job you try to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to keep keep at it, for quite a while. And what happened was I went through it, and I intended to do it in book form. That was my original intention. But at the time I couldn't find a publisher, and so I kind of gave up and put it aside for a while. Until then the internet came along, and I kind of knew it would work there. So then I put it up on the internet.
So this is interesting. I got introduced to your work through your website, but I've seen your print books. I mean, the Skeptics Annotated Bible hard copy, it looks and feels like a real Bible with like the red little nice ribbon and everything. And it's kind of like a Shakespeare guide you might read, where you have the original text, and then in the margins you have it labeled like, here's an example of misogyny, here's an example of sacrifices or whatever. But one thing I wanted to ask you, you said you couldn't find a publisher, and it seems like you are publishing all of these things through your own personal imprint that you created. Is that right?
Yeah. That's right. It was at the time that I started this thing, it was very hard to do that. You either had a publisher or a lot of money. Maybe if you had a lot of money, you might be able to do it on your own. But I didn't have, I didn't have a lot of money, and I couldn't find a publisher, so I felt kind of stuck, and I was pretty disappointed with it. I mean, I sort of did it just for my own use, So I felt like it was worthwhile, even if I couldn't get it published, because it was helpful to me.
I mean, and the internet, the website was great. It helped a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, the website is just a natural for the website, and the nice thing about the web, is when you can continuously add to it and, correct it as you go, and so it's a great medium for that.
So you kind of mentioned earlier, and I think we've all heard this before, that anybody who's actually read the Bible cover to cover is probably a non-believer. What do you say when people who say they're Christians and I've read the Bible, I know it front and back? Like, what do you say when you have not only read it but so closely read it? What do you say to them? Like, do you say, "Are you an idiot? Like, do you not understand what that meant?"
Well, I guess that's what I don't really think that. I don't say it, of course, and I don't really think that, because I know too many very intelligent people that have done just that. It's amazing what people can justify. It's as though you had a Jewish person that was taking Mein Kampf, and was trying to say that wasn't, it's not really anti-Semitic, and the Bible, to me, is much the same. Almost everything that the Bible is telling you, with some exceptions. There's some good stuff in the Bible, some pretty good stuff, and not very much, but there is some. But with that exception, with those exceptions, the horrible stuff is really horrible. And nobody believes that you should execute a woman who isn't who isn't a virgin on her wedding night, or a disobedient child, or you should burn people to death, like is an actual punishment for some crimes in the Bible. No one today or has believed that, or really they haven't really believed it in at least 400 years, or at least a few hundred years. So it's amazing to me that anybody can read that stuff and say, well, yeah, I believe this. In fact, I based my whole life upon it. I don't understand that, but people, most Christians haven't read it, but and those that the really serious Christians have, and they're very good at finding a nice sounding explanation for the the worst atrocities in the Bible. I give them a lot of credit for the effort and their ability to rationalize that stuff in the Bible.
Was there
Somehow
anything?
They do it. I don't.
Was there anything in your research when you were reading through the Bible and documenting all this that just stood out to you? Like you had no idea it said that.
Almost all of it did. I was a believer. Now, I didn't start out a believer. I came from a non-religious family, but in high school, my sister, the one that was becoming a Jehovah's Witness, became a Catholic because she married a Catholic. And I would go to church with her and stuff, and we'd argue all the time about religion. But I never read the Bible. But I ended up convincing myself that I believed in God, and I became a Christian. And then when I became a Christian, I said, well, what the heck? I'm going to become a Catholic. And I said, well, I'm going to become a Catholic priest. And I ended up going to the seminary of Archbishop Lefebvre. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's the guy that was excommunicated in the 80s because he was so extreme.
Before my time.
Extreme conservative. Yeah. So I went all the way. I went crazy on it, And then in the seminary, I started to doubt. I jumped too quickly through some kind of important questions like the existence of God, the idea of hell, the problems that evolution presents, and all that whole mess. And so I ended up spending a lot of time arguing with the professors at the at the seminary, and ended up leaving. Although I was still a Catholic. In fact, I married my wife was a traditionalist Catholic, and all of our 4 children are baptized Catholic. But after our 4th child was born, when he was still a baby, at that point I decided I didn't believe it any longer. That was 1988, and so it was the next year when I actually started this Bible project. But I hadn't read it as a Catholic. That's not too surprising.
Yeah, I've heard that from many Catholics.
Yeah. You let the church figure all that stuff out,
Sure. Are you familiar with the Jefferson Bible? Because this project kind of reminds me a lot of what Thomas Jefferson did.
Cutting out all the supernatural stuff.
Yeah, I guess for people who don't know, Thomas Jefferson went through, I think it was just the New Testament, and physically took a razor and cut out the stuff that he liked, like the stuff that wasn't supernatural, that was just moral teachings, pasted that into a new book, and it's become the Jefferson Bible. Are you are you familiar with that? Do you take inspiration? Do you think that's a helpful exercise?
Do I think it's a helpful exercise? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what the good stuff that I have. I have. I'd have to check how many. There are several hundred verses in the Bible that I have marked as good, and they would have been the same ones that
I like how that's a separate annotation that you got to make. This is a good section.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, I only had a few categories, and none of them were good. But then I decided, there are Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. That's a good idea. So I highlighted that. It's just a shame that in the next chapter you're executing homosexuals, and you have to burn to death a man who has sex with his wife and his mother-in-law. You have to burn all 3 to death.
They know what they did.
And I don't know how you love your neighbor as you're burning him to death, but somehow you've got to be doing that. Contradiction.
Check mark. Yeah. Let me ask you about your other book. One of the other books called Drunk with Blood. So you again, I don't know if you did additional research for this one or if you just used the ones you'd already done, but you went through and you said, here's a passage in the Bible where God kills people. This is what the Bible says, but based on, research or whatever, I don't know, you can tell us that. You said, here's like what the Bible explicitly says, and here's the estimate based off of that. And
what was body count?
Yeah, a body count. And what did you figure out at the end of that whole process? And how did you figure out those numbers?
Well, in some cases the Bible tells you exactly how many people were killed, and in other cases it doesn't. So if you take just the Bible's number, then it turns out to be about 2.5 million. But if you
all had it coming.
If you try to estimate it, then it's 25 million somewhere. It depends. I mean,
because sometimes the Bible just said he killed everyone in some area, and you don't know how many.
Flood alone.
Yeah, or how many people died in the flood. Right. It's kind of hard to know how many people died in an imaginary flood.
And how did you make your estimates? How did you make your estimates for the imaginary flood deaths?
How many unicorns died in the flood death?
I used the best. Well, Christians say that it happened in about 2400 BC. And then I got a book by, I forget the authors, but it's a book by historians who have their best estimates of human populations at various places in Earth at that time. And the human population at the time was thought to be about 20 million. And so that's the value that I used in my estimate.
So at the worst possible way, you said it's about 25 million. If you take explicitly what the Bible says, conservative estimate, we're talking 2.5.
Estimate.
That's like 2.5 million. And how many people did Satan kill in the Bible?
Good question.
Well, 10, actually. 10, and God deserved the credit for that. If you were having a murder trial, then they would both be, equally guilty. Or maybe God would even be more guilty. I don't know.
I have
known better.
I have seen those memes comparing God's deaths and Satan's deaths, and that's all based off of your work. But those memes have been floating around for so long, and it's hilarious. It's like, oh, Satan, not a bad guy. God's kind of an asshole.
In the Bible, in the Bible, he's actually a pretty good guy. At least he would have been if he wasn't hanging out with God.
God's a bad influence on Satan.
Yeah.
I actually, when I was, I don't know, maybe a sophomore or junior in college, and I was just kind of like trying my atheist hat on, we were reading Paradise Lost, and we'd read like the first like little chunk of it. And I remember being very like, this is bullshit. Like, God is laying down these rules that are completely arbitrary, and that's nonsense, and blah, 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 blah. And my professor, or maybe it was a student, but somebody looked at me and was like, you sound like Satan from later in the book. And I was like, I don't know how to take that. And now
you found out it's a compliment.
100%.
Yeah. You also, you did the Skeptics Annotated Bible with literally the Bible, but you've also now done the Quran. You've also done the Book of Mormon and done the same stuff. Mm-hmm. So did you do the same process? Did you read through all of it? Or did you say, hey, person who actually knows the Book of Mormon, why don't you come help me out here?
No, that would have been good, but no, I did it all myself. And but the Book of Mormon and the Quran were both done like I did the Bible. Like the first time when I did the Bible, just kind of flying through it and highlighting like the Book of Mormon. The main idea of the Book of Mormon is that Jews sailed to the New World, and some of them were bad, and so God turned their skin dark, and that's where Indians came from. And that's pretty much that's the Cliff Notes version of the Book of Mormon. That's what it's about. So of course I'm going to be highlighting the parts where this silly thing about the Jews building a boat and sailing to North America, along with times when God is turning people's skin dark because they misbehaved. But beyond that, other than highlighting all the end that came to passes, and the other crazy stuff, I didn't go through it thoroughly. That's what we're trying to do now. In fact, my son, Philip, is going through and doing blog posts on each of the chapters of the Book of Mormon. And he's almost done. And when he's done, we're revising the website as he does that. And then when he's done with that, which he only has about 30 chapters to go, we're gonna do the Book of Mormon as a book.
Fantastic!
Well. Awesome.
Put that in the Marriott hotels.
So, Steve, let's talk about Old Testament versus New Testament. Like, is the Old Testament a billion times worse? Is there a lot more slaughter and, like, things kind of even out in New Testament?
Or is the New Testament also pretty bad?
Yeah, I think, actually, that in the New Testament may be worse than the Old.
Really?
In the sense that, the New Testament really invents the idea of hell. And if there's a bad idea that anyone's ever had, hell has to be right up there as being one of the worst. Mm-hmm. The idea that you would torture someone forever after they die for whatever reason is a really horrible idea, and that's the idea of I guess that's one of the main ideas of the New Testament. And I think Jesus gets an awful lot too much credit for being a good guy. I mean, he said some nice things, but he also said some really nasty things.
Yeah.
Saying that people should hate their families and love him more than their families, and cursing entire generations just because they didn't like his preaching. He could be kind of a nasty guy. And Paul was a very unlikable guy. He didn't say very much that was nice. There's a little bit here and there that's nice, but mostly it's it's not very nice stuff. And so, I mean, you don't have. It's not all about animal sacrifice. You don't have to be doing that. That's nice.
I wish someone would say this in church.
You don't have to burn
just
people
one
to
day.
death.
Come on, you guys. New Testament isn't all about animal sacrifice.
We can all get
Jesus said some horrible things.
Isn't.
So when people...
And any book that ends is bad. I mean, it certainly ends badly, right? With Revelation. You can't end worse than that.
So, Steve, when people say to you, like, I get my moral guidance from the Bible, what is that code for I've never read it?
No, I don't know. They don't, of course.
Sure.
No one gets their guidance from the Bible, and they haven't for 2,000 years. Even one of the favorite lines that are little stories in the Bible in the New Testament is where Jesus is being criticized by the Pharisees for not washing his hands. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, you guys don't kill disobedient children like it tells you to do in Leviticus. And and so even at the time of Jesus, the people had realized that we shouldn't be killing disobedient children anymore.
So we haven't said anything original in 2,000 years.
Yeah. I mean, even at the time of Jesus, people weren't following what the Bible said because the Bible was just too cruel. And no one has. No one has done what the Bible says, and no, I don't think anyone ever really has tried to do what the Bible says. I don't think anybody really takes Jesus seriously when he says that you should hate your family, like he very clearly did in Luke. So people don't get their morals from the Bible. Although they do find some nice things in the Bible, and they do try to live up to those. You know, they take some of the better parts of the Bible, and they say, "See, look at the point at that," and say, "See, that's where I'm getting my morals from."
Do Christians ever tell you
they do get their morals kind of from the Jefferson Bible? You know, they kind of get their morals from that, but they ignore the rest of it.
Do Christians ever tell you that by going through line by line and trying to tell us where all the bad stuff is, you're just kind of missing the bigger picture here? And that's what you should be focused on.
Absolutely. You get that all the time. That if you look at the Bible as a whole, then it's very clear that it's all about Jesus. You know, when God says that he's going to corrupt your seed and spread dung upon your faces, like he does in Malachi 2:3. That's all about Jesus somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but somehow it is. And so, but they would tell you that every single thing in the Bible is pointing toward and directing you toward Jesus. And then Jesus said all these nice things, and so you should follow that. So that's kind of the basic way that they claim that you have to look. If you look at it from that perspective, then you can really justify anything in it. I guess at least that's what they like to claim.
But I mean, you can justify anything and anything. You can find good and moral lessons in any book. I get frustrated. What can I say?
Yeah, you can do a lot better with just about any random book that you pick up.
Yeah.
You know.
So tell us a little bit about this new book. You talk about what you learned about the biblical justifications for and against homosexuality. What did you discover that maybe we haven't heard before?
Well, I think that the fun part about this project for me was realizing how it's used, especially by liberals, to justify to be able to say that the Bible both says nothing about homosexuality, or that it actually says it actually approves of homosexuality.
Is that a fair interpretation?
No, it's not. The Bible, when it speaks clearly, and it doesn't say much about homosexuality. There's only 5 verses, 5 or 6, depending on what you consider. People will kind of argue about this, but there's only a handful of verses that are explicit about homosexuality, and those 5 very clearly condemn it. But
so when liberal Christians are using the Bible to say, and I mean, there's a very popular book out by a guy named Matthew Vines right now talking
Yeah.
about how the Bible actually supports LGBT rights or whatever it is. What is he getting wrong? What is he doing that he shouldn't be doing?
Well, I can't really say with regard to Matthew Vines because I haven't read his book. I've listened to some of his talks on
YouTube,
on YouTube and stuff. Yeah, so I think I kind of have an idea of what he's saying. And with regard to the 5 explicit verses that condemn homosexuality, there are some arguments that can be made, sometimes quite good arguments. For example, one of the big questions is what was going on at Sodom? What was the sin of Sodom? Why did God kill everyone in Sodom and Gomorrah? And of course, conservatives say that God killed everyone in Sodom because they were trying to commit homosexual rape on Lot's guests, angels that were visiting there, and they wanted to have sex with these angels who looked like guys, I guess pretty good-looking guys. And so that shows God's hatred for homosexuality, and that's where the word sodomite would come for. That's used, still used by conservative Christians. Whereas liberals will look at that and say, well, it wasn't about that at all. It was about hospitality.
They weren't being hospitable to those angels, and that's why.
They weren't being hospitable. No, they had these guests, and Lot had some guests, and they wanted to do nasty things to them. It's okay that Lot, when this happened, offered his virgin daughters to instead.
I knew I'd heard this one.
But yeah, that was all right. But the idea that these guys just wanted to have sex with these angels that appeared like men, and that got God so upset because he hates homosexuality so much. But anyway, the liberals have a pretty good argument here because everywhere else in the Bible, when it talks about the sin of Sodom, it talks about it being greed and not taking care of the poor. And there's a long list of things that happen that are said throughout the Bible that don't say anything about homosexuality, but say that the sin of Sodom was something else. And so they have a pretty good argument in that case. And then they do a similar thing, like when in Leviticus 18, chapter 18, where it talks about homosexuality being an abomination. They have a fairly good, well, of course, there's a good response to that, a fairly obvious response to that is so we're shellfish, and so we're eating shellfish. A very four-legged flying creeping things are an abomination to God. There's a long list of things that really creep God out, and homosexuality is just one of them. So since we ignore God about the shellfish and about the four-legged flying creeping things, we can ignore God on homosexuality as well. And so they have explanations for all of when St. Paul talks about the only verse in the Bible. There's only one verse in the Bible that deals explicitly with lesbianism, and that's in Romans. But they have a good rationale for most of these. Not a good rationale, but they have a rationale, an explanation. They have a rationale that explains why the particular verse, which seems to, when you read it, to be very clearly a condemnation of homosexuality. They have a reason why they think it wasn't. But the funnest thing about it, about the project, is looking at what they do with Jesus and with Yahweh and with Paul. They make them they're all homosexuals, and if God
Explain that
himself
one.
is homosexual.
Yeah. Expound.
Okay. Well, Paul, let's take Paul. It's a little easier to see how they get there with Paul. Paul was troubled by this thorn in his flesh. He had trouble and it involved one of his members. He doesn't say which member it was, but it was driving him crazy, and he hated himself for it. He said that he did all kinds of things that were hateful, and he just couldn't stop. And and he warned everyone else not to get married and to stay away from. He thought that it was better for men not to touch women. So, what the liberals are saying is that they suspect that what Paul's thorn was homosexuality. So Paul was a homosexual.
Interesting.
So that's a pretty easy one. Now, to get Jesus to be gay is a little bit tougher, but not too bad, because Jesus actually never said he loved anyone in the Bible. Except for in the Gospel of John. The other three Gospels, there's only one person that he was said to have loved, and that was the rich man, and the rich young man who asked him, what do I need to do to achieve eternal life? Jesus looked at him with love. Well, that pretty much did it there. When he looked at him with love, then what they have is that Jesus actually, he had a thing going with this guy.
Wait,
so they have that.
Is that really the only time they say Jesus loves somebody or something? Is that really the only time it's mentioned?
Yes, it is, except for in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John has Jesus loving 4 people. The disciple whom Jesus loved, that's another story where Jesus, the disciple whom Jesus loved, is mentioned throughout the Gospel of John. Some people think it may be the author of John, and he leans his head on Jesus's breast, and there are all sorts of things that look, if you look at it right, they look a little bit gay. So that's one thing. And then the other person that he loved was Lazarus, and that looked, the people were making that into a gay thing. And then the other 2 people were the sisters of Lazarus, and so they're saying actually that there's probably he's probably bisexual actually, that he loved both Lazarus and his sisters.
We have a title for the podcast.
He loved both Lazarus and his sisters, Martha and Mary. They all had a thing going with Jesus.
And you're telling me you call this book Strange Flesh and not Jesus was a bisexual?
Subtitles.
You missed out on a good opportunity.
I don't really believe any of this stuff, because here again, I don't even know if there was a Jesus.
Right.
I certainly have no idea what his sexuality might have been. But what believers, the liberals are doing is they're pointing to these stories and they're questioning Jesus' homosexuality. They're asking, in some cases, they're actually saying that he was the best, that the evidence shows that Jesus was homosexual. And they do the same thing with Yahweh. And you got to admit, there's some weird stuff going on with Yahweh. He wants his prophets just about have to get naked. Isaiah spent 3 years. Saul, the first thing he does when the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, he starts prophesying and taking off his clothes. He lay around in front of God and everybody naked. God exposed himself to Ezekiel, showed the glory of the Lord, and he saw his loins, and they look like they're on fire.
So moral of the story, when you go to your next orgy, bring a Bible. That is what I have learned.
This is making my day. I'm so happy right now.
And these are the arguments that liberal Christians can sometimes use to say, look, the Bible isn't as anti-gay as you think it is.
Like, who cares?
Exactly.
Gives a shit.
And that's just the other thing is that most of the prophets were too, So if you're going to condemn homosexuality, then you're going to have to condemn Paul, Jesus, Yahweh, and almost all the prophets. At least that's what they're trying to make you believe.
After listening to you kind of expound upon this a little bit, I have to think that the reason the Bible is still, quote, relevant is because it's so damn long that people can find anything they want in there. And I have to think that's why it's still around. Like, if it was
it's a
as long
giant Rorschach test. I'm saying that
oh
wrong,
my God, that's exactly what it is. Rorschach?
Rorschach, yeah. Whatever. Wikipedia.
I don't think there's any idea that a person could come up with that he couldn't find a justification for in the Bible. It doesn't teach anything clearly.
What do you
and that's
hope?
why, it's so contradictory.
Sure.
What do you hope is the goal? Anyone who reads Skeptics Annotated Bible or any of your other books, what do you hope they take away from it by the end? I mean, and I don't think anyone reads your book straight through, not the Skeptics Annotated Bible, because it's very long, but what do you hope anyone glimpsing any of this takes away?
Well, with regard to the Skeptics Annotated Bible, what I intended it to be was just if someone were to pick up the Bible and had never heard anything about it, I'd like the Skeptics Annotated Bible to help them to make a good assessment about its worth as a moral guide, and whether or not it has, and also with regard to its truth value. Is there any reason why I should give any importance at all to this book, or should I just reject it outright? There may be some good poetry here and there, but not very darn much. But is there anything that's worthwhile as a moral guide? And I'm hoping that it'll be pretty obvious that, well, not much.
Okay, well, Steve, that about does it for us. Thank you so much. This is a lot of fun.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, and Hemant, I have a birthday coming up next week, and I do not own a copy of this book, so...
Done. We'll have links underneath
that.
The information for the podcast for anyone who's interested in the copies. But yeah, Steve, keep up the good work, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve.
Oh, you bet. Been fun. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast for FriendlyAtheist.com. This episode was taped at Cinnamon Sound Studios in Aurora, Illinois, and the music was written and performed by Brad Chagdis. If you like what you're hearing, please consider making a contribution at patreon.com/Hemant, that's He-Man T. We appreciate your support. I'm Hemant Mehta.
And I'm Jessica Blumke. We hope you'll join us next time.